I'm Kathleen Bennett, 34 years old, sitting in a mahogany-lined law office, trying not to make eye contact with my ex-husband James. After 8 years of marriage, he left me for his secretary. Despite our divorce, I maintained a close relationship with his father, Walter, who became my mentor. When Walter died suddenly of a heart attack last week, I was shocked to be summoned to the will reading. What I never expected was to walk in and find James with his very pregnant Mistress Rebecca and their newborn baby. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had to face someone who betrayed you. Looking at James across that conference table, I could hardly believe this was the same man I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. We met at Boston University during my final year studying interior design. James was in the business program, following in his father's footsteps, preparing to join Harrington Properties, the real estate empire Walter had built from nothing. Our romance was a whirlwind. James was charming, ambitious, and seemed to adore everything about me. Within 6 months, he proposed with a diamond that made my roommates gasp. Our wedding was everything I'd dreamed of. His family spared no expense, especially Walter, who welcomed me with open arms. "You're the daughter I never had," Walter told me that night, his eyes crinkling with genuine affection. "James is lucky to have found someone with your talent and heart." From the beginning, Walter and I connected in a way that surprised everyone, including me. Where James was flashy and sometimes impulsive, Walter was thoughtful and strategic. He took an interest in my design ambitions, often asking to see my portfolios and sketches. "You have a gift for seeing potential where others don't," he said once, looking through my renovation concepts. That's the secret to success in real estate too. By our second anniversary, with Walter's encouragement and a small loan he insisted on giving us as a gift, I launched my own interior design business. While James worked at his father's company, I built my client list, often collaborating on the finishing touches of Harrington Properties developments. Those first 6 years were good, or so I thought. The warning signs started small. James began coming home later, claiming meetings ran long. Business trips multiplied. The warm, attentive man I married became distracted, checking his phone constantly, stepping outside to take calls. "Is everything okay with you and James?" Walter asked during one of our monthly lunches, something that had become our tradition. "Just busy," I answered, but the concern in his eyes told me he wasn't convinced. Then came the hotel receipts in his jacket pocket. Charges for room service, with 2 glasses of champagne when he was supposedly alone. The unfamiliar perfume that definitely wasn't mine. The classic signs I'd been too trusting to see. When I finally confronted him, James denied everything at first. Then, as I presented more evidence, his denial turned to anger. Then finally, cold admission. "It just happened," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Rebecca and we've been working closely together, and things developed." Rebecca, his secretary of 2 years. 26 years old and apparently irresistible to my husband. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Does it matter?" he replied. It did matter. Everything mattered when your life was collapsing. The divorce was ugly. James tried to claim part ownership of my design business, despite having nothing to do with its success. He argued that his family connections had built my client base, which was partly true but ignored all my hard work and talent. Through it all, Walter was my unexpected champion. He testified about my independent contributions to projects. He connected me with his own attorney. And most surprisingly, he maintained our relationship despite James's fury. "My son is making the biggest mistake of his life," Walter told me over coffee 3 months after the divorce was finalized. "But I won't compound his error by losing you too." We continued our monthly lunches. Walter referred clients to me. He checked in regularly, becoming the steady support I desperately needed while rebuilding my life. James was livid about our ongoing relationship, according to Walter, but his father didn't care. You're family to me, Kathleen. That doesn't end with a divorce decree. Our last lunch was just 2 weeks before his death. Walter seemed troubled, pushing food around his plate instead of eating. Everything okay? I asked. James is making decisions I don't agree with, he said carefully. About the business, about his personal life. I'm trying to figure out the right way to handle it. Anything I can help with? He smiled sadly. Just keep being who you are, Kathleen. I may need to ask a favor soon, but not quite yet. We parted with our usual hug, neither of us knowing it would be the last time. If I had known, I would have said so much more. The call came at midnight. I fumbled for my phone, groggy and confused. Kathleen? It's Margaret, Walter's sister. My stomach dropped immediately. Margaret wouldn't call this late with good news. Walter had a heart attack this evening, she said, her voice breaking. He didn't make it. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Walter was only 68, vital and strong. He played tennis twice weekly and had just started taking Spanish lessons. Heart attack? It made no sense. There must be some mistake, I said stupidly. I wish there was, Margaret replied. The paramedics said it was massive. He was gone before they arrived. I sat up all night, staring at old photos on my phone. Walter and me at the company Christmas party. Walter proudly showing off the office building I'd helped redesign. The two of us at his favorite Italian restaurant, glasses raised in a toast. The funeral would be in 3 days. I agonized over whether to attend. James would be there, possibly with Rebecca. The thought of facing them while grieving Walter was almost unbearable. My decision was made for me the next morning when a courier delivered an envelope with my name written in Walter's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a brief note. Kathleen, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. There are things I need to make right. Please attend my funeral and the reading of my will afterward. Trust that I've thought this through carefully. You are the daughter I always wanted, and I'm grateful for the joy you brought to my life. With love, Walter. The funeral was exactly as Walter would have hated, formal, stuffy, filled with business associates making networking connections even while standing beside his casket. James stood at the front, playing the grieving son perfectly, with a very pregnant Rebecca beside him. I slid into a back row, hoping to remain unnoticed. No such luck. Walter's friends spotted me immediately. Kathleen. Walter would be so glad you came, said Robert Chin, Walter's tennis partner. He spoke of you often, you know, right up until the end. Others approached with similar comments, each one drawing more attention to my presence. I could feel James's cold stare from across the room, but kept my eyes focused elsewhere. The real shock came when I glimpsed what I first thought was a baby carrier near Rebecca's feet. They had already had the baby? But Rebecca still looked very pregnant. It made no sense until I got a better look later and realized it was indeed an infant, maybe 3 months old. The timeline didn't add up, which meant Rebecca must have been pregnant during our divorce proceedings. As people began filing out after the service, Margaret approached me. He was hoping you'd come, she said, squeezing my hand. Walter had a plan, you know. Don't let anything that happens next surprise you too much. Before I could ask what she meant, James appeared beside us. What are you doing here? He asked, voice low and tight. Walter invited me, I replied simply. He's dead. He didn't invite anyone. Margaret stepped between us. Actually, James, your father specifically asked that Kathleen attend both today and the will reading tomorrow. James's face flushed. That's ridiculous. She's not family anymore. According to whom? Margaret replied, then turned to me. The reading is at 2 tomorrow, at Franklin Phillips's office downtown. I hope we'll see you there. As she led James away, I noticed Rebecca watching me with an odd expression, somewhere between smugness and apprehension. That evening, needing to feel close to Walter, I drove to Salvatore's, the Italian restaurant where we'd had most of our lunches. The staff recognized me immediately. Miss Kathleen. We heard about Mr. Harrington. Such terrible news, said Antonio, the owner. He was here just last week, you know. He was? I didn't realize. Antonio nodded. 3 times, actually. Meeting with Mr. Phillips and some other serious-looking gentleman. Many papers, much discussion. He lowered his voice. He did not look happy, but determined, if you understand. I didn't understand, not yet. But I would soon enough. Phillips and Associates occupied the entire 32nd floor of a gleaming downtown tower. I arrived 15 minutes early for the will reading, but wasn't the first one there. Walter's brother Edward and his wife sat stiffly in the reception area, along with Margaret and several cousins. They acknowledged me with nods ranging from polite to cool. Kathleen, good to see you. Franklin Phillips himself emerged from an office to greet me. In his 70s, with silver hair and bow tie, he had been Walter's attorney and friend for 40 years. Thank you for including me, I said. Oh, I'm just following Walter's explicit instructions, he replied with a meaningful look. At exactly 2 o'clock, Phillips was about to lead us into the conference room when the elevator dinged. James strode in with Rebecca on his arm. The surprise was the baby carrier James held in his other hand. An awkward silence fell over the room. I hadn't seen James up close in almost 2 years, and despite everything, my heart still did a stupid little jump. He looked tired around the eyes, but otherwise the same, tall, dark-haired, with the confident bearing that had first attracted me to him. Rebecca looked different from when she'd been just the secretary. Designer maternity dress, expensive highlights, diamond earrings that looked suspiciously like ones from Walter's mother that had been promised to me someday. But it was the baby that caught everyone's attention. Tiny, with a tuft of dark hair, sleeping peacefully despite the tension in the room. Sorry we're a bit late, James announced to no one in particular. Little Walter needed changing. Little Walter. They had named their son after his grandfather. Something twisted painfully in my chest. Rebecca caught me looking and deliberately adjusted the blanket, showing off a monogrammed corner. WH. Walter James Harrington. This way, please, Phillips said, leading us into a large conference room dominated by a portrait of Walter on the wall. James positioned himself and Rebecca directly across from me. The baby carrier he placed prominently on the table. Rebecca, still very pregnant with what I now realized was their second child, kept one hand on her belly while the other possessively clutched James's arm. Before we begin, Phillips said, I want to thank you all for coming. Walter was very specific about who should be present today. He opened a leather portfolio and began with standard legal preamble. Then came smaller bequests, Walter's vintage car collection to his brother Edward, his vacation home in Maine to Margaret, specific jewelry pieces to various family members, and generous donations to his favorite charities. James shifted impatiently in his seat. What about Harrington Properties? He interrupted. The actual business assets? Phillips adjusted his glasses. I'm proceeding in the order Walter specified, James. We'll get to the business holdings shortly. As the lesser bequests continued, I noticed Margaret watching me with an unreadable expression. Rebecca whispered something to James, who nodded confidently. Finally, Phillips cleared his throat. Now, regarding the primary assets, including Harrington Properties and related holdings. He removed a sealed envelope from his portfolio. Walter left a personal letter to be read aloud at this point. The room grew still. Phillips broke the seal, unfolded several pages, and began to read. To my family and those gathered here today, if this letter is being read, I've left this world sooner than I'd hoped. I've built my life around 2 things, this business and my family. One has given me great satisfaction. The other, I'm sorry to say, has recently given me great disappointment. James, my son, I raised you with certain values: honesty, loyalty, integrity. Somewhere along the way, you've forgotten these principles. Your betrayal of your marriage vows was bad enough. Your treatment of Kathleen during and after your divorce showed a callousness I never thought I'd see in my own child. But your recent business decisions and personal choices have forced me to make difficult decisions about my legacy. James's face had gone white. Rebecca's smug smile froze and cracked at the edges. Phillips continued reading. After careful consideration, I've decided that controlling interest in Harrington Properties, including all subsidiaries and development projects, will pass to Kathleen Bennett. The room exploded. James jumped to his feet, shouting. Rebecca's coffee cup crashed to the floor. Walter's brother stammered in confusion. Phillips raised his voice over the chaos. Furthermore, my personal investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $12 million, will also transfer to Kathleen with the following conditions. This is insane, James shouted. She's not even family anymore. I'm his son. James, please sit down, Phillips said firmly. There's more. Somehow the room quieted, though James remained standing, hands braced on the table. Kathleen has demonstrated the business acumen, ethical standards, and vision that I always hoped to see in my successor. During the 8 years she was my daughter-in-law, and the 2 years since, she has shown integrity that makes her worthy of carrying forward what I've built. For James, I establish a trust with an annual allowance, conditional upon his completion of business ethics courses at Boston University. He may earn increasing responsibility in the company if Kathleen, as majority shareholder, approves. For my grandson, Walter James Harrington, I establish a separate trust fund for education and future needs, with Kathleen and Margaret serving as co-trustees until he reaches the age of 25. This is utterly ridiculous, James spat. My father was not in his right mind. We'll contest this immediately. Phillips calmly set down the letter. I anticipated this reaction. Walter did too, which is why he took extraordinary measures to document his mental capacity and reasoning. He slid a folder toward James, including psychiatric evaluation confirming his sound mind and documentation from private investigators. Rebecca spoke for the first time, her voice higher than normal. Yes, Margaret said quietly. My brother suspected for some time that James and you had, concerning plans for the company once Walter was gone. He hired professionals to look into certain decisions and meetings that troubled him. You knew about this? James turned on his aunt. I did. Walter confided in me after he discovered you and Rebecca had been approaching investors about selling off company divisions once you inherited. Divisions my brother spent decades building. Phillips held up a flash drive. Walter also recorded a video statement explaining his decisions, specifically to address any claims of diminished capacity or undue influence. This is your doing, Rebecca hissed at me across the table. You manipulated a lonely old man. I hadn't spoken a word throughout the reading. Now all eyes turned to me. I had no idea, I said truthfully. Walter never told me any of this. Phillips nodded confirmation. Miss Bennett was not involved in these decisions. In fact, Walter asked me not to inform her before today. He handed me a small envelope. He did, however, leave you this private note, along with a key to his home study. He asked that you read it alone. James looked like he might vault across the table at me. This isn't over, he said, voice shaking with rage. Not by a long shot. Rebecca leaned forward, one hand still on her belly, the other pointing at me. You'll regret this, she whispered. This isn't over. Little did they know how right they were. The moments following Phillips's bombshell announcement remain a blur in my memory. James demanded a private meeting with the attorney. Family members huddled in shocked discussions, and I sat frozen, the small envelope from Walter burning a hole in my hand. What I remember clearly is Rebecca following me into the hallway as I tried to escape the tension of the conference room. You think you've won, don't you? She said, blocking my path to the elevator. Her baby had awakened and was fussing in the carrier she held. This isn't about winning, I replied, trying to step around her. Bull. You've been playing the poor abandoned wife, cozying up to Walter all this time. Planning this. I had no idea about any of this, I repeated. Rebecca laughed, a harsh sound that made her baby cry louder. Sure, just like you had no idea about us until James finally told you. Something in her tone made me pause. What do you mean, finally? Her smile was pure venom. We were together for a year before you found out. A whole year right under your nose while you were too stupid to notice. And another year before that with connections. The floor seemed to drop beneath me. 3 years? You and James were involved for 3 years of our marriage. Don't act so shocked. James was looking for an exit strategy from your marriage long before I came along. I just gave him an incentive to finally make the move. The baby's cries grew more insistent. Rebecca bounced the carrier impatiently. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I want you to know what you're up against. James and I have plans. Big plans. And we're not letting some outdated will get in our way. The conference room door banged open and James stormed out, his face thunderous. What did Phillips tell you? Rebecca demanded. He won't budge. Says everything is airtight. James turned to me. Happy now? You've stolen my birthright. I didn't. Save it, he snapped. You think you can run a real estate empire? You arrange throw pillows for a living. That's not fair, I said, finding my voice. I built a successful business that would be nothing without my family's connections, he finished. And now you've manipulated my father into giving you everything. Margaret emerged from the conference room. That's enough, James. Your father made his own decisions for reasons he felt were justified. James rounded on his aunt. You helped him do this. I supported my brother in protecting his life's work, she replied calmly. Something you clearly had no interest in doing. What's that supposed to mean? It means Walter found out about your meetings with Crossfield developers. About your plans to sell off the residential division once you inherited. James's expression confirmed the accusation. Those properties are underperforming. It was a smart business decision. Those properties house families who've rented from Harrington for generations, Margaret countered. Your father kept rents reasonable and maintained those buildings because he cared about the community, not just the bottom line. We need money, Rebecca blurted out, then looked like she regretted speaking. James shot her a warning look, but Margaret pounced on the admission. Yes, about that. Your father knew about your gambling debts, James. And the failed side investments. The money you've been diverting from company accounts. I stared at James in shock. This was a side of him I'd never seen, or perhaps never wanted to see. Walter was having chest pains for months because of the stress you put him under, Margaret continued. His doctor warned him to reduce his anxiety. Instead, he stayed up nights trying to figure out how to save the company from his own son. You're blaming me for his heart attack? James's voice rose dangerously. That's rich. If anyone killed him, it was her. He jabbed a finger toward me, poisoning him against his own family. The elevator doors opened, and Walter's longtime assistant Diane stepped out, carrying a large accordion file. She stopped short at the scene before her. I have the additional documents Mr. Phillips requested, she said uncertainly. Perfect timing, Margaret said. Those would be the financial records Walter compiled. James made a move toward Diane, but a security guard who had appeared beside her stepped forward protectively. Back off, James, Margaret warned. Those files contain evidence of your embezzlement. Walter was prepared to go to the authorities if necessary, but hoped it wouldn't come to that. I felt physically ill. The man I had married, had loved for years, was unrecognizable to me now. Diane handed me a folded paper from her file. Mr. Harrington wanted you to have this specifically. It's the last note he wrote before. Her voice trailed off. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. Kathleen, I should have seen who James truly was years ago. I'm sorry for what he put you through. Please protect what I've built. You're the only one I trust to do it right. W. Something inside me broke. The shock, the revelations, the weight of Walter's trust. It was too much. I pushed past everyone and fled to the elevator, tears blinding me. In my car, safely alone, I finally let myself fall apart completely. For Walter, for the years wasted with James, for the magnitude of betrayal that seemed to grow with each new revelation. And somewhere in that breakdown, something else was born, a determination I didn't know I possessed. For 3 days, I avoided calls from Phillips, from Margaret, from numbers I didn't recognize. I needed time to process everything, to read Walter's personal letter in private, to decide what I was going to do. The letter was 10 pages of Walter's distinctive handwriting, detailing how he'd discovered James's various betrayals. Business irregularities first caught his attention, unusual expenses, meetings that weren't on the official calendar, documents missing from files. Then came the private investigators' reports on James's personal life. I didn't want to believe it, Walter wrote. What father wants to see his son as dishonest? But the evidence became impossible to ignore. When I confronted him about the financial discrepancies, he lied to my face with such ease that I realized this wasn't new behavior. It made me question everything, including his account of why your marriage ended. Walter had discovered that James and Rebecca had been involved long before I ever suspected, just as Rebecca had taunted. He found evidence that they'd been planning their future together, including how they'd leveraged James's eventual inheritance. The final straw, Walter wrote, was finding the proposal they'd drafted for Crossfield developers to purchase our affordable housing units, buildings that have been part of our mission since my father started the business. James knew my feelings about those properties, about the families who've lived there for generations. This wasn't just a business disagreement. It was a complete rejection of the values I'd built my life around. The letter ended with an apology. I should have seen James's true character sooner. Perhaps I could have spared you some pain. I hope this bequest offers some measure of justice, though I know it can't erase what happened. I believe in you, Kathleen. You have the heart and the head to lead this company better than James ever could. This is my final request. Don't let him destroy what 3 generations have built. When I finally called Phillips back, I learned that James had indeed filed to contest the will, claiming undue influence and diminished capacity, despite the extensive documentation Walter had prepared. It won't succeed, Phillips assured me, but it will delay the formal transfer of assets. In the meantime, the court has granted a temporary injunction preventing James from accessing company accounts or making business decisions. What about the embezzlement Margaret mentioned? I asked. Walter was reluctant to pursue criminal charges against his own son. He hoped the will would be leverage enough to force James to straighten out. But all the evidence is preserved if that becomes necessary. My next call was to Margaret, who invited me to lunch the following day. We met at Salvatore's, both of us acknowledging the bittersweet choice of location. Walter would approve, she said, lifting her water glass in a small toast. He always said important conversations happen best over good food. Over pasta, Margaret filled in more details about James's recent activities. The gambling had started 3 years ago, around the time he began seeing Rebecca, I noted silently. Bad investments followed, then increasingly desperate attempts to recoup losses. Rebecca's more involved than you might think, Margaret said. She's ambitious and expensive. The baby complicated their timeline. Which one? I asked, still struggling to understand the situation with the infant and Rebecca's current pregnancy. Margaret's expression turned grim. That's another thing you should know. The baby, little Walter, isn't actually James's. I nearly choked on my water. What? Rebecca was briefly involved with one of James's business associates before focusing on James. When she got pregnant, she led James to believe it was his. Walter discovered this through the investigators, but James still doesn't know. The tangled web of deception seemed endless. Why would she do that? Security. James was her ticket to wealth, but only if he inherited. A baby, especially a grandson named after Walter, was insurance. After lunch, I drove to Walter's house, using the key he'd left me to access his private study. The room was exactly as I remembered, walls lined with books, The antique desk where he'd written countless letters in his precise handwriting, family photos spanning generations. I spent hours going through his files, reading his notes about company operations, his journals documenting his growing concerns about James, his careful plans for the future of Harrington Properties. The more I read, the clearer it became why Walter had made his shocking decision. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang. Phillips. Kathleen, I apologize for calling so late, but there's been a development. James attempted to access the company's main investment account today. The bank blocked it per the court order, but he became belligerent. Security had to escort him out. Is he desperate for money? It appears so. My sources tell me he and Rebecca have significant debts. They were counting on quick access to Walter's assets. What should I do? Come to the office tomorrow. It's time to implement the transition plan Walter created. He was quite thorough in his preparations. The next morning, I met with Phillips and Walter's executive team, many of whom had known me for years through my design work on their properties. Some seemed skeptical about Walter's choice, others relieved. James has been making promises to his friends, explained Howard, the chief financial officer. Executive positions, development deals, property transfers at below-market rates. The vultures have been circling, waiting for Walter to retire or die, I finished quietly. Yes, we've been holding them off, but we need clear direction now. We spent the entire day reviewing operations, financial positions, ongoing projects. My head swam with information, but beneath the overwhelm, I felt a growing sense of purpose. This was what Walter had trusted me to protect. That evening, against Phillips's advice, I drove to James's apartment. I needed to see him face to face, to understand if there was any path forward that didn't involve prolonged legal battles. Rebecca answered the door, looking surprised and immediately hostile. The baby, not James's son, I now knew, was crying somewhere in the background. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "I need to speak with James." "He doesn't want to talk to you." James appeared behind her. "It's fine. Let her in." The apartment was luxurious, but showed signs of chaos: packed boxes, papers strewn across tables, empty takeout containers. Rebecca disappeared with the crying baby while James and I faced each other in the living room. "Come to gloat?" he asked. "No. I came to see if there's any way to resolve this without dragging it through the courts." He laughed bitterly. "Sure. Hand over my father's company, and we're good." "The company that you were planning to dismantle and sell off?" His eyes narrowed. "So you've drunk the Kool-Aid too." My father never understood modern business. Those properties are underperforming assets. They're homes, James, for hundreds of families. They're real estate holdings that could be leveraged for actual profit. In that moment, I finally saw clearly what Walter had realized. James and I had fundamentally different values. There would be no compromise. "The will is going to stand," I said quietly. Walter made sure of that. "You can waste money on legal fees fighting it, or you can accept the terms he offered, the trust fund, the ethics courses, the path to earning back responsibility in the company. Under your control?" He scoffed. "That's never happening." "Then I guess we'll see each other in court." As I turned to leave, Rebecca reappeared, baby on her hip. "This isn't over," she said, echoing her threat from the will reading. "We know things about you, about the business, things that could cause problems." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, genuinely curious about how far they would go. James stepped forward. "Let's just say there are documents that might interest the IRS or possibly the Housing Authority. Documents that could create significant complications." "You mean the falsified inspection reports you submitted last year? Or the tax documents you altered?" I asked calmly. "Walter found those too. The originals are safe with Phillips." James's face drained of color. He hadn't expected me to know about those particular transgressions. "You're bluffing," Rebecca said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm not. But I'm also not interested in destroying James's life. That's the difference between us, I think." I just want to honor Walter's wishes and protect what he built. I left them standing in their chaos, feeling strangely calm for the first time since Walter's death. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was clear. The next morning, I stood in front of Harrington Properties headquarters, a sleek 12-story building downtown that Walter had designed himself 20 years earlier. My design firm had handled the latest renovation of the lobby and executive floors 3 years ago, a connection that now felt like Walter's subtle preparation for this moment. Ms. Bennett. The security guard nodded respectfully as I approached the front desk. Phillips had called ahead. My access badge was waiting. In the elevator, my stomach churned with anxiety. What did I know about running a real estate empire? Interior design was my expertise, not property management or development finance. What had Walter been thinking, placing this responsibility on my shoulders? Then I remembered his words from years ago. You have a gift for seeing potential where others don't. That's the secret to success in real estate too. Phillips met me on the executive floor. There's a management meeting in 15 minutes. Walter would normally have led it. Are you ready? No, I admitted. But I don't think waiting will make me more ready. He smiled approvingly. Walter said you'd say something like that. The conference room fell silent when I entered. 12 executives, mostly men, most of whom I'd met through Walter over the years. Some faces were friendly, others guarded, a few openly hostile. Thank you all for being here, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. I know this is an unusual situation. Walter's decision surprised me as much as anyone. With all due respect, interrupted Thomas, the development director who had always been closely aligned with James. What qualifies you to lead this company? You're a decorator. A few uncomfortable coughs around the table. I felt my cheeks warm but met his gaze directly. I'm an interior designer who built a 7-figure business from scratch. I understand property valuation, client relations, and project management. But more importantly, I shared Walter's vision for what Harrington Properties should be, not just profitable, but beneficial to the communities it serves. Lovely sentiment, Thomas said dismissively, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills. James has actual experience in this business. James also has actual experience embezzling from this business, said Howard, the CFO, bluntly, and making deals behind his father's back that would have dismantled Walter's legacy. The room erupted into competing voices. I let it continue for a moment, observing who defended James, who supported Walter's decision, who remained strategically silent. Finally, I stood. The room gradually quieted. I understand your concerns. If I were in your position, I'd have the same questions. So let me be clear. I don't intend to micromanage departments where I lack expertise. What I will do is uphold Walter's core principles while bringing a fresh perspective to the business. I turned to the large map of Boston on the wall, where pins marked Harrington Properties throughout the city. Walter showed me this map years ago. He knew the story behind every pin, not just the financial details, but the human stories. The family-owned grocery that's been a tenant for 40 years. The apartment building where 3 generations of families have lived. The office complex that houses 20 small businesses that got their start because Walter offered flexible leases. I faced the room again. Those stories matter. They're not just sentiment. They're the foundation of this company's reputation and long-term success. I won't sacrifice them for short-term profit, and I won't work with anyone who would. The message was clear. Get on board or get out. Now, I continued, I've reviewed the pending projects Walter approved before his death. Those will continue as planned. I'm implementing a 30-day freeze on new major commitments while I get up to speed, with exceptions for time-sensitive matters that Howard and Margaret will help evaluate. For the next hour, we discussed ongoing operations. I asked questions, took notes, listened more than I spoke. Some of the initial tension eased as the meeting progressed. Afterward, Phillips pulled me aside. Well done. You've got a steep learning curve ahead, but that was a strong start. Thanks. Is there any update on James's legal challenge? His attorney requested a settlement meeting. I think reality is setting in about his chances of overturning the will. The settlement meeting was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I immersed myself in learning everything I could about Harrington Properties operations. I met with department heads, toured properties, reviewed financial statements, and spent long evenings in Walter's study, reading his meticulous notes. Margaret became an invaluable ally, sharing insights about the business and family history that helped me understand Walter's decisions more clearly. He started watching James more carefully about 5 years ago, she told me during dinner at her home. There were small incidents, expense reports that didn't add up, meetings with developers Walter had specifically declined to work with. Nothing major on its own, but a pattern emerged. Why didn't he confront James directly? He did, eventually. But James had become skilled at explaining things away. And Walter wanted to believe him. What parent doesn't want to trust their child? It was only when the evidence became overwhelming that he accepted the truth. About the business or about our marriage? Margaret sighed. Both. Walter suspected James wasn't being truthful about your divorce, but he didn't know the full extent until the investigators uncovered the timeline of his relationship with Rebecca. Did he know about the baby not being James's? Yes. That discovery was particularly painful for him. Not because he cared about biological legacy, but because it represented another layer of deception in his son's life. The settlement meeting took place in Phillips's office. James arrived with his attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s. Rebecca was noticeably absent. James looked worse than he had at his apartment, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his normally immaculate appearance now rumpled. His attorney did most of the talking, proposing various compromises that would give James more control and money than Walter's will had provided. Phillips professionally but firmly rejected each proposal. I mostly observed, speaking only when directly addressed. This is ridiculous, James finally exploded, interrupting his own lawyer. It's my father's company. My birthright. Birthright comes with responsibility, I said quietly. Walter believed you weren't ready for that responsibility. He gave you a path to earn it back. Under your thumb? Never. Then we have nothing more to discuss, Phillips concluded, gathering his papers. James's attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm as he half rose from his chair. We should consider the ethics course requirement, she said. It's a reasonable step toward demonstrating good faith. And the trust fund for little Walter? Phillips asked. Do you accept the terms of co-trustees? A flash of something. Calculation? Worry? Crossed James's face. The trust stays as is, he conceded. It was a small victory, though I suspected it had more to do with James's financial desperation than any concern for the baby's future. As the meeting concluded, James lingered behind his departing attorney. You know you're in over your head, he said to me. You'll run the company into the ground within a year. Maybe, I acknowledged. But I won't dismantle it or betray Walter's values. His values, James sneered. His outdated, sentimental approach to business. The market doesn't care about family stories or community legacy. You're right, I said. The market doesn't care. But people do. And this business was built on relationships with people, not just transactions in the market. For a moment, James looked like his father, the same furrowed brow, the same intensity. Then his expression hardened. This isn't over, he said, the third time I'd heard that threat from him or Rebecca. Actually, it is, I replied. You have 2 choices now, James. Accept your father's terms and work toward redemption, or walk away and build something new on your own. Either way, Harrington Properties will continue without you until you're ready to honor what it stands for. He left without another word. 2 days later, I led my first board meeting as acting CEO of Harrington Properties. I presented a vision that honored Walter's approach while acknowledging the changing market realities. I introduced plans for modernizing certain aspects of operations while preserving the core values Walter had established. When I finished, Walter's oldest friend on the board, Gerald, broke the silence with slow applause. "Walter chose well," he said simply. "I admit I had doubts, but not anymore. He'd be proud of what I've heard today." The board voted unanimously to approve my initial proposals, including a renovation project for one of the oldest apartment buildings in the portfolio, a project James had repeatedly tried to cancel in favor of selling the property for redevelopment. As I left the boardroom, Howard handed me a financial report. "First quarter projections," he said. "We're actually up 8% from last year, despite the disruption. Turns out Walter's sentimental approach to tenant retention saves us a fortune in vacancy costs and marketing." I smiled, feeling Walter's presence in that moment. "Send those numbers to James, would you?" With a note saying the ethics course registration deadline is next Friday. 1 year later, I stood in Walter's study, my study now, looking out at the Boston skyline as the sun set. So much had changed, yet Walter's presence still filled this room, guiding my decisions, reminding me of the values that had built Harrington Properties. The company was thriving. Our occupancy rates were at an all-time high, and our reputation had actually improved following the transition. The renovation of the West Side apartments, the building James had wanted to sell, had been featured in Business Monthly as a model of sustainable urban development that preserves community heritage. James had eventually enrolled in the ethics courses, more out of financial necessity than genuine reform. His allowance from the trust provided a comfortable living, but not the extravagant lifestyle he and Rebecca had anticipated. They had moved to a smaller apartment, and rumors suggested their relationship was strained. Little Walter's trust fund remained secure under my and Margaret's oversight. Rebecca had fought the co-trustee arrangement initially but backed down when her own finances grew precarious. DNA testing had confirmed what Walter's investigators discovered: James was not the baby's biological father. The revelation had been another blow to James's already fragile ego. As for me, the journey from betrayed wife to company leader had been challenging but transformative. The first months were overwhelming, learning the intricacies of property management, development finance, and corporate governance while navigating the complicated emotions surrounding Walter's death and James's betrayal. Therapy helped. So did the support group for divorced women that Margaret encouraged me to join. Sharing my story with others who understood the unique pain of betrayal was surprisingly healing. "You're not defined by what happened to you," my therapist had said during one particularly difficult session. "You're defined by how you respond to it." Walter had known that about me, somehow. He'd seen a strength in me that I hadn't recognized in myself. The phone on my desk rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Daniel, the architect I'd hired for the Riverside development, Walter's final project, now moving forward under my direction. "The Planning Commission approved our proposal," he announced. "Every detail, exactly as you presented it." "That's wonderful news," I said, genuinely excited. The Riverside project embodied everything Walter had valued: affordable housing alongside market-rate units, green spaces, local businesses on the ground floor, and a community center named in Walter's honor. "Dinner to celebrate?" Daniel suggested. "Unless that's unprofessional now that you're my boss?" I smiled. Daniel and I had been dancing around a potential relationship for months. He'd been patient, understanding my need to establish myself professionally before complicating things personally. "I think the CEO is allowed to have dinner with the project architect," I replied, "especially when the Planning Commission just approved his brilliant design." After we hung up, I walked to Walter's portrait on the wall. It had been moved from the conference room to my study, a daily reminder of the man who had changed my life twice, first by welcoming me into his family, then by trusting me with his legacy. "I hope I'm making you proud," I said softly to the painting. The doorbell rang, Margaret arriving for our monthly dinner, another tradition I'd maintained. "Good news about Riverside," she said as I welcomed her in. Walter would be thrilled. I was just telling him that, I admitted, gesturing to the portrait. Margaret smiled. He knew what he was doing, you know. When Walter made a decision, it was never impulsive. He watched you for years, saw how you handled both success and adversity. Over dinner, we talked about the business, about James's recent request for increased responsibility at the company, denied for now, but with clear benchmarks for reconsideration, and about my evolving relationship with Daniel. Walter would approve of him too, Margaret said. He values the same things: community, integrity, creating spaces that enhance people's lives. Later, alone again, I reflected on the strange, painful journey that had led me here. If James hadn't betrayed me, I might still be in a hollow marriage, unaware of his true character. If Walter hadn't seen my potential, I might never have discovered my own strength and capabilities. The greatest betrayal of my life had ultimately led to my greatest growth. Not because the betrayal itself was valuable, it wasn't, but because it forced me to rebuild myself on a stronger foundation. I thought of the women in my support group, many still raw with the pain of betrayal, unable to see any possible good coming from their suffering. I remembered feeling exactly the same way. Time doesn't heal all wounds, I had told them at our last meeting. But it gives you perspective to understand that the people who betray you don't define your worth. The people who believe in you, like Walter believed in me, help you see your true value. The next morning, I visited Walter's grave, bringing yellow roses, his favorite. It had become a monthly ritual, a chance to update him on the business and my life. The Riverside project is moving forward, I told him, arranging the flowers in the cemetery vase. Daniel's design is everything you would have wanted. We break ground next month. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. James completed the ethics course. He's asked to observe some management meetings. I'm considering it, with conditions. I don't know if people truly change, but I want to honor your hope that he could. I traced Walter's name on the headstone. Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. For trusting me with your legacy. For showing me that family isn't always about blood. It's about who believes in you, who brings out your best self. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter somehow. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. Betrayal leaves scars that never completely fade. But I had built something meaningful from the ashes of that pain. Walter had given me that opportunity, but I had done the work. I had transformed. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Planning Commission just released official approval documents. Celebration dinner still on. I smiled and typed my reply, absolutely. Here's to building something that matters. And that, I realized, was the most powerful response to betrayal. Not bitterness or revenge, but creating something of value, something that would outlast the pain. Walter had understood that. Now, finally, so did I. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that eventually led to unexpected growth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and transformation. And don't forget to share with someone who might need to be reminded that our deepest wounds sometimes become our greatest strengths. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, those who truly value you will never betray you. Those who betray you never truly valued you.